Now, just a word about this story before we consider it. The story of the Tower of Babel comes from a part of the Old Testament that we call prehistory. The first 11 chapters of Genesis fall into this category. Now, the word Genesis means beginnings, and many of the stories of Genesis, especially the first 11 chapters, are all about the beginnings of various aspects of human life, how and why the universe came into being, the beginning of people, the beginning of sin, the beginning of murder. And our story is concerned with the beginning of various kinds of people and their various languages and ultimately their cultures. So this is one of those stories that is not literally true, and yet it contains some essential truths that we must consider. Did it really happen this way? Probably not. But as the wise teacher told the inquisitive student, I don't know if it happened this way, but I know it's true. Here we go. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And they migrated from the east and came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the mortals had built. And the Lord said, look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they purpose to do now will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Glory be to God who gives us the word. May God write that word on our hearts, and may God and God alone receive glory, honor, and praise. When the good people on the committee chose the readings for Pentecost Sunday, they were having a good day. Obviously, the story of that first Christian Pentecost following Jesus' resurrection had to be one of the readings for the day, and we began our worship with that story once more. But the committee had the wisdom and the foresight to couple that story with the story of the Tower of Babel from the book of Genesis. Now, on the surface, the Pentecost story tells of the undoing of Babel. At Babel, the people of the world were confounded with the advent of various languages, confusing them and bringing their building project to a halt. In the Pentecost story, the disciples, now apostles, are given the gift of various languages so that all the people of the world could understand what they had to say fully. That combination of stories makes for a good sermon, and I've attempted to write one several times over the last 30 years. But I'm taking another whack at it this morning. Specifically, I want to begin by comparing the Babel story and then spending a few minutes on the meaning of the Pentecost story and what this day means to us as Christian people. That's where we're headed. Now begin with the setup to the story. The whole earth had one language and the same words. The rabbis translated it, the whole earth had one language and few words. But there were no nationalities. There were no diverse cultures. There was nothing but a homogeneous humanity. Sounds kind of boring, doesn't it? Everyone eats the same food, and you better hope it was not prepared by a Scottish cook. Everyone thinks the same thoughts. Everyone is just like everyone else. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth." Now the thought may well have been that if the people could inhabit one city and continue to speak one language and think common thoughts, well, maybe people could be dissuaded from expanding their knowledge and their vocabulary, because that would promote nonconformity, and it would stand for a unity far over a diversity. And let's not forget that the people of the earth had been destroyed by a flood prior to this story. So by making kiln-fired bricks, they could build higher buildings, great buildings, fantastic buildings. And if a flood should come again, the thought may well have been that some could escape the rising waters simply by climbing higher. Besides, bricks are all the same size, the same color, the same shape. The bricks are a metaphor for the very uniformity that the people so highly prized. So the people began building. And along the way, God stoops down. Isn't that wonderful? God stoops down to see the greatness of the people. God has to lower God's self to behold the wondrous work of the creatures God created. And then God notices that they are doing pretty well. Now, did God act because God was afraid of what the human creatures were capable of doing? I can't imagine that God is ever that afraid of us, though we have certainly given it a try. Now, it could be that God was afraid that because we were all one, we would never learn anything new. After all, we were a nice, close, homogeneous community. It could be that God understood what building projects do to those who take them on. Perhaps God knew that egos tend to run wild and inflate. It could be that God was concerned that such hubris is part of us, and that we might even begin speaking for God and making God say things and think things that benefit us more than God. So God decided to add diversity to the mix. God decided that the best way for the human creature to become more of what God intended when God created us was for there to be different languages and cultures and ideas and traditions. God might have decided that it would be better if we had different music, different foods, different art, different understandings. God introduced new languages at Babel, thwarting our attempt at making a name for ourselves and exalting ourselves beyond our capacity. Now that's the story. Let's dig just a little deeper. Could it be that what God intended for us as a blessing, we have distorted into more of a curse? Could it be that the diversity and variety that God desired for us has been, at our hands, turned into a reason for jealousy, fear, and hatred? Could it be that we have perverted what God intended for good? Babel has traditionally been interpreted as being about individualism. The cause of individualism creates some who prosper and some who can't. Individualism ensures us that some will have more while others will have less. Individualism asserts that each of us has the right to better ourselves, even if it means worsening the lot of others. This is part of the Babel element. Babel informs our status as being first world. Babel is at the heart of our materialism, our economic domination, our military domination, our newly rediscovered nationalism. The Babel element, which exists within each of us, believes in building walls, the Great Wall of China, the Berlin Wall, the partitioning of Pakistan from India, the hatred and killings between Ireland and Northern Ireland, the Israeli-Palestinian wall, and the proposed wall between Mexico and the United States that we are currently discussing. Babel even breaks apart churches. You see it with one church citing its desire to be theologically and spiritually pure, throwing out a part of its number because they are not theologically and spiritually pure. Churches exclude those who are women from significant leadership because the God of paternalism is mightier than the God of the Bible. Churches exclude anyone who doesn't fit the age-old definitions of male, female, and family, if for no other reason that it challenges the age-old norm. Churches have the Babel element too. The Babel element makes injustice thrive. The Babel element convinces people that they are better than others and that they can even own and manipulate other people. The Babel element creates enemies individually and collectively. The Babel element introduces war between people and nations. The Babel element convinces us to look to ourselves for answers to our problems and to disregard anything and everything that God might have to say. The Babel element is real. Terrifyingly real. And it is alive in each of us. But there is also the Pentecost element. The Pentecost element is that part of us that sees the value in diversity. The part of us that is not afraid of someone who is different from us. The part of us that believes that people have far more in common than what would divide them. The Pentecost element reminds us that no matter of where we call home or what language we speak, we are all children of God. The Pentecost element instructs us to be people of peace, to put away the way of violence, and to love our neighbor as ourself. The Pentecost element jogs our memory to tear down the walls that divide, to seek the welfare of the powerless and poor, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, clothing to the naked, shelter to the homeless, care to the broken, and hope to the disheartened. The Pentecost element calls us back to be the people of God, redeemed by Jesus Christ for a new way of life that is empowered and strengthened by the Holy Spirit. Those who act and live on the impulse of the Babel element do not understand or appreciate the other way of living. But the Pentecost element is God calling each of us and all of us to abandon the way of hatred, fear, and self-importance, and to live lives of love, hope, and humility. The Pentecost element calls us to think and act less on the basis of self and more on the basis of community. Yes, we are children of Babel. We see it and we know it. We are also children of Pentecost. We see it. We know it. We live in the flow and flux that exists between those two nearly polar opposites. We know that both elements exist within us, and we know how easily we can slip out of one and into the other. But the goal is to be the people of Pentecost. The goal is to embrace our God-given diversity, even as we put away the fear and fracturing to which Babel still calls us. The goal is to live together, work together, celebrate together, and build a world of justice and peace together. At Pentecost, the Spirit of God is sent to work with our diversity and to create a unity in its midst. At Pentecost, the Spirit of God comes to empower us to live beyond the Babel element and to live in the bounds and bonds of community and love that are the gifts of the Spirit. At Pentecost, we are given the chance at a new life that can be shared and enjoyed by all, for now and evermore. Amen.